We spend so much money on coloured pencils, but have you ever thought about the paper you're using? I've tested 20 different papers to find out the best paper for adult colouring pages. Today, my goal is to help you find the best paper to get the most out of your pencils. I've been making adult colouring pages for years now, and in that time, I'm embarrassed to admit that I've used normal printer paper for most of my drawings. I didn't think that paper mattered. I thought it was all about good quality pencils and lots of practice. So my artwork suffered and people noticed. Because even the best pencils won't perform as well as they should if you're using terrible paper. As soon as I purchased some quality paper, I found my pencils were so much easier to use and much more enjoyable. Even the cheapest pencils can perform better on quality paper. So I started on a hunt to find the best paper for my art. Very quickly, I found myself confused. There are a lot of different types of paper, so much conflicting advice online, and most of the recommendations I could find were for products that didn't exist at all in my local shops. I've spent the past few months buying and testing different brands and different types of paper recommended by artists on YouTube, Google, Facebook, and more to work out if there was a simple solution. And even more, if I could finally offer an answer to everyone who keeps asking me what is the best paper to print their colouring pages. And here we are. And in an effort to keep a complex topic simple, I will include more information and some extra links with further information in my blog post if you'd like to take a deeper dive for yourself. So what is the best paper for adult colouring pages? The answer to this question depends more on you than you may think. So let's go over a few things you need to know about yourself and your project first. Different artists will have different preferences. Your colouring technique, the brand of pencils or markers you use, and even your style of art will change the type of paper that you might like. That's one of the reasons why there are so many choices available and why there's no clear guide on the perfect paper to buy. Next, what mediums are you using? Pencils and markers are the most common mediums for adult colouring, and both react to paper very differently. What type of printer do you have? This is something that you won't often see mentioned in paper reviews because they are usually aimed at pencil artists, not at printing colouring pages. And I've found it to be the biggest hurdle in using many of the higher quality papers in my colouring. More on this soon. And finally, your location and budget. Because paper is expensive to ship internationally, so some brands might be harder to find in your location and might limit what you can get. If you get stuck, find a small local art shop and ask them for recommendations. Once you know what you're looking for, I recommend trying a few different types of papers with the different mediums that you own to get a feel for what you enjoy using the most. And over the next few minutes, I'll help you know what to look for by going over the different types of paper, different terminology, and hopefully take out some of that confusion that I felt when I first started on this hunt for the perfect paper. First, let's cover some of the strange new terminology that you'll come across in your search for paper. Bristol, cartridge paper, vellum, abrasion resistant, GSM, decal edge, caliper, acid free, calcium carbonate, bursting strength, alpha cellulose, hot press and cold press, cotton rag, hard size, felt side, granulation, hydrophobic paper. I think it's scared of the water. Illustration board, Ingress paper, light fastness, linen rag paper, optical brighteners, ream, sizing, tooth, wood-free paper. And confusingly, wood-free is an abbreviation for groundwood-free and is a term only used for wood pulp paper. Okay, that wasn't helpful. This is why we are all so confused. So let's just focus on the basics. Texture, the tooth of the paper. This is possibly the most important thing to look for when choosing the right paper, especially if you're colouring with pencils. It's the tooth of the paper, the small valleys and ridges in the paper's texture that allow you to build up layers of colour and blend multiple colours together more easily in your colouring. Paper texture can be smooth, rough, or somewhere in between. Standard printer paper has very little tooth, so even the best pencils are limited in how much they can do. There are plenty of paper options with more tooth, ranging from a medium texture known as a vellum finish, which is different to vellum paper, to the rough texture that you'll find in watercolor paper or mixed media papers. Your choice of texture comes down to preference. Paper with a smooth texture are generally better for markers or pen artwork, but don't have enough texture to absorb pastels or layers of pencils. Paper with a rough texture are perfect for pastels or charcoals, but will absorb too much of your marker ink and can use up your pencils more quickly. Can actually leave a lot of white grain in your artwork if you don't use enough layers. When it comes to pencils, a medium texture is a great starting point. Some artists prefer to use smoother papers for detailed work or hyperrealistic art, like the Strathmore Bristol Smooth Paper. These don't allow for much blending or layering, but they do reduce all grain and produce some beautiful results, especially if you're intending to lay your pencils on top of markers. This might not have the tooth, but it still handles colored pencils and markers so much better than standard printed paper because of our next point, paper weight. So heavier or thicker paper like Bristol is more durable and can handle more layers than lighter paper. And if you're using markers, watercolor pencils, solvents, or other wet mediums, the thicker paper can handle the extra moisture much better. Paper weight is measured in pounds or GSM. I'll go into more detail about the specifics of what these measurements mean and the differences on my blog. Standard printer paper is 80 GSM or 20 pounds. The higher the number, the thicker the paper. Watercolor paper, for example, is much thicker, often 200 to 300 GSM. Ideally, I try to use paper as thick as my printer can handle. Thicker paper is nicer to use and handles all mediums better, as long as my printer can take it. In fact, let's talk about printing for a moment. Printing is the biggest hurdle I came to find when looking for the right paper for my coloring pages. And the advice online for colored pencils was aimed at artists who were drawing from scratch, not coloring something they had printed. Every printer is different, so what works for me might not work for you. Find out what size your printer can take. In Australia, we usually use A4, but most of our printers can also take US letter-sized paper, so that is helpful. It was suggested to me to cut down larger size paper to the right size for my printer, but honestly, when I tried this, my printer was so fussy and it just got jammed, no matter how accurately I tried to cut it down. So test this for yourself. A flat tray or multi-purpose tray will handle thicker paper much better than your regular printer tray, so use this if your printer has one available. There are other factors to consider as well, but many are unnecessary as a beginner and will just get confusing. So let's instead look at some of these types of paper to talk through their differences and help you learn what to look for and share with you some of my personal favorites. So I've bought a lot of paper here, and this is just a small sample of what is available online. But I've tried to gather a good range of options from the most popular colored pencil brands recommended by artists and coloring book groups to help you find something that works for pencils, markers, and within a reasonable budget. I've been testing some of these pages out in my previous videos already, but there are a few that I've only just recently purchased that I'll be trying out for the first time today. So first let me show you what I've been using until now, and you'll see from some of the examples that I have been using this quite recently. So we have first coloring books, and if you've been buying them from Amazon, a lot of them are printed on the same paper through Amazon's printing services. Now the thing with this paper is it's quite thin, so you're limited with layers. This is actually one of the main reasons I sell printables on my website rather than only focusing on the Amazon books, even though all of my books are on Amazon as well. When it comes to printing yourself, I used to just print everything on printer paper. Now here's a picture that I've done with Copic markers on printer paper, and as you can see from the back, it bled through quite a lot. And the biggest thing I noticed when coloring this, if you look really closely, is that all of the ink bled a lot. Now I worked that in and created a shadow around the leaves so you can't see, but all of these leaves actually bled into the background and it was really hard to stay within the lines. So it really does have a lot of limitations, even though the end result was still good. So cheap paper is not going to ruin your artwork. You can still create something amazing, but it's definitely a lot harder to achieve the same results. Then I stepped things up with some cardstock. Now this cardstock is different to some of the cardstock that I'll be showing you soon in that this is made for card making, and it is actually good for card making, but is the only thing I could find that was thicker than printer paper in our local Officeworks. And here are two pictures that you might recognize from my channel where I have used this cardstock. The one on the left done with my very nice luminance pencils, and the one on the right with my Crayola pencils. And while both of these pictures have come out really well, they took a lot of work and the pencils really have not been done justice. If you look really closely on this left one, you can see there is a lot of scratchy work and I wasn't able to layer as much as I could have if I used a quality paper. And if you actually watched this video, which I'll link to above, I complained about this paper during the process and commented that it was making the process much harder. In fact, I think I'm going to have to take on the Crayola challenge again on some fancy paper just to see if we can create something a little bit better. So it's time for an upgrade. First, let's start with the most obvious choice for a newbie, the paper that is marketed as coloured pencil paper. So I have bought the Strathmore 400 series coloured pencil paper, Canson Drawing 220 paper, and the Derwent Academy Artist Drawing Pad. These papers have a good weight and a good amount of tooth, just like we've talked about. But personally, I don't actually think they are the best papers for working with pencils. In fact, I much prefer the next range of papers that I'm about to show you, right after you take a moment to press subscribe if you haven't already done so. Introducing the Bristol range. Maybe you've heard this word thrown around, or maybe it's new to you, but either way, the Bristol papers should definitely become a part of your collection if you're using coloured pencils. I had no idea what Bristol even meant until recently. Basically, Bristol is paper that is made up of 2 or more sheets of paper that are glued together so that it is stronger. Bristol comes in either a smooth or vellum surface. The vellum surface has a bit more tooth and so is a better option if you're just starting out with coloured pencils. However, many artists like the smooth surface for hyper-realistic drawings. Both types of Bristol seem to work quite well with markers and other mediums as well, so they are a great option if you're wanting to layer markers and pencils together. So today I am comparing Canson's Smooth Bristol, Strathmore's Smooth Bristol in the 300 series, Strathmore's Vellum Bristol in the 300 series, Strathmore's Vellum Bristol in the 400 series, which is a slightly higher quality, along with their Bristol Vellum in the 500 series, which is as good as it gets. It is 100% cotton and I haven't even tried this yet, so I'm very excited about this one. And I've also found 2 budget options that are intended for printing, the Neenah Cardstock Bristol Vellum and Spring Hill Digital Bristol Vellum. So before we test these papers for ourselves today, I also wanted to show you some previous testing I've done. So you might remember from my ultimate pencil comparison video that I actually already tested some of these papers against the different pencils, and I have those results here. So at that time I tested the Strathmore 300 series Bristol smooth and vellum surface. I had the Canson drawing paper, I had the coloured pencil paper from Strathmore, and I was comparing them up against my printer paper and the colouring book from Amazon. And as you can see from these results, I burnished these quite heavily, and when I did, the actual colours don't look a whole lot different between each one. So the good news is if you're starting out, you don't need to panic if you actually can't afford these papers yet. It's okay. You can still start with normal paper like I've been doing. The biggest difference with the quality of paper is your ability to layer, and that ability to layer makes it so much easier to use your pencils and easier to blend those colours, which in turn does give you better results. So to give you an idea of what else I've been using since then, here are some pictures that I have done. So these first 2 were probably my first attempt at realism, and I used the Derwent Artist Drawing paper for these. It was a good starting point, but it's not as thick as the Bristol, so it's probably not my favorite, but it did work really well with the pencils. So you might recognize these next 2 pictures as well. This one is from the very popular How to Blend Colored Pencils video on my channel. And this was done with the Bristol Smooth Surface paper, which we will have a closer look at in a second. And this lollipop, also from another video, was done with the Canson brand Bristol Smooth Surface. So very similar, they're basically the same paper, just different brands. They worked great with the Prismacolors. And I also chose this paper for my paperclip drawing, which you'll find in my YouTube shorts, that has caught a lot of people out because this smooth paper is really good for fine details, which is exactly what I needed for this. And you can see all my giveaway shadows. So go check out that short. Now you know which one it is, so hopefully you can pick it out. But this is probably my favorite piece I've done. with the Bristol Smooth. I love the detail I was able to do in this drawing on this smooth surface, and as you can see, I spent a lot of time with a white pen adding all of the sparkling glitter in Sadness's hair, and I really love how it turned out. That was with the Canson Smooth Bristol again. This was where I used markers and pencils together to layer to create really amazing detail in this cake. And I used the Strathmore Bristol 300 series for this. So given that this is the 300 series, and I'm really impressed with these results, I'm actually really excited to see just how much better the 400 and 500 series papers are, because I haven't tried them yet. And this final one I will be coming back to because this isn't a Bristol paper at all. This is actually a watercolor paper, but more on that shortly. So I'm testing out the colored pencil papers against all of these different range of Bristol papers. And look, there's not actually a whole lot of difference. I think buying any of these papers is going to be a huge step up from the standard printer paper. I've started off with just some light layering with my Faber-Castell Polychromos. I'm not burnishing these because I really want to see just how many layers I can do on these pages and just how they actually feel under the pencil. The Canson drawing paper is a lot thicker than the others, and it's possible that's actually aimed more at graphite drawing rather than colored pencil. And the only other major difference was that the smooth papers feel quite different to use. The pencils almost glide around and there's a bit of a learning curve, as we've sort of already talked about. But otherwise, these all performed fairly similar. And after using the Polychromos, I then went and used my Caran d'Ache Luminance and then my Prismacolors, and I have to say that the more I'm using the Polychromos pencils, the more they are slowly going to the top of my list as a favorite pencil, which is good, but also a little bit annoying, because with all the pencils that I've bought, this is all of the Polychromos pencils that I own, which wouldn't be a problem, except that I made a deal with you guys that I would buy the big set of Polychromos when this channel gets to 100,000 subscribers. Which was a great idea for a reward at the time because it would be an amazing reward, except that that reward has kind of turned into a punishment for me because now I can't go just buy it because that would be cheating. So I need to wait until I get to 100,000 subscribers. So help me out. So I really need you guys to help me get there. I've got a challenge here, and I'll tell you what, if I get there, one of you gets the full set as well in the beautiful wooden case, plus a bunch of other prizes I'm giving away. So please help me out because I really want the big set now. But back to our paper, look, the Bristol Vellum 400 and 500 series definitely performed better than the basic brands, but I don't really think there's enough of a difference to justify spending that extra money on something like a colouring page. And the two cheaper brands being the Spring Hill Digital and the Neenah cardstock that are both a Bristol Vellum ready to print on actually performed just as well as some of the other Bristol Vellums. So while they may not be that professional grade, I definitely think that they are great for colouring pages. Now, if you came here for that information, you might be tempted to end this video here, but don't. Stick around as I have a very important tip at the end of this video that you need to know if you want your artwork to last. Let's quickly look at some of the other papers I've collected. And by the way, I have included all of the papers discussed in this video in my blog post in the description below, so you can find out more about them or find links to try out your favorites. Watercolor. Don't dismiss watercolor paper just because you're not intending to get your art a little wet. Some of the most amazing pencil artwork can be created using watercolor paper with colored pencils when you know what to look for. In the past, I just thought watercolor was like this. Thick, really rough paper that almost looks handmade. But watercolor paper, especially quality watercolor paper, comes in all shapes and sizes. And when I say sizes, I'm not just talking about sizes like big or small. There's actually a process in paper manufacturing called sizing that makes the paper stronger and changes how it absorbs liquid. Without sizing, your paper would act more like a paper towel, absorbing everything with no control. Beyond sizing, watercolor paper also goes through different processes. The paper is rolled through metal rollers that are either hot or cold, resulting in a smooth or textured surface, which gives us hot press watercolor paper and cold press watercolor paper. and look at the difference. So this is Fabriano Cold Press Studio Watercolor. And these are both Fabriano Hot Press Studio Watercolor. One is 200 GSM and one is 300 GSM. So the only difference here is the paper weight. These papers almost resemble the Bristol Papers and can be really nice to work with. I've only used the hot press paper once so far and I was really impressed with the results. Although they are often more expensive, so maybe better suited to professional art rather than colouring pages. So pretty much straight away, you can see the difference between the hot press watercolor paper and the cold press watercolor paper. The hot press is more like the Bristol vellum that we've been working with, or even a little bit more towards the smooth Bristol that we used before. And the cold press is more like the traditional watercolor that you've probably been used to in the past. So I decided to pull out my dough and Inktense for this because I thought, we're dealing with watercolor paper, let's get some water. Definitely need to pull these dough and Inktense pencils out for an actual picture again soon, and on proper paper this time, because when I did these in my Inktense video, I used the cardstock. I didn't use watercolor paper. And I wish I used this paper. So the hot press is nice to use with normal pencils or with the wet media. It's kind of, I guess it's kind of like almost mixed media, even though it's not mixed media paper. But I really like it, and for me it feels kind of like it's halfway between a smooth Bristol and a vellum Bristol. And while I wouldn't use it and probably wouldn't recommend it for colouring pages because it is expensive and it's definitely overkill for that, I personally would love to play with this more for just general art. There are a few more papers I want to show you. Each of these are better suited to art and drawing than colouring, but they are definitely fun to explore and get creative. So they're worth checking out if you're wanting to expand your skills. So first I have the Strathmore Toned Grey medium surface paper. I bought this after seeing so many people use this on Instagram, and you can get it as a tan, a grey or a blue colour. Basically the idea here is that you're starting your artwork using the mid-range colours so that you get to add the shadows and the highlights rather than starting from white. And the end result can be quite interesting. The Fabriano black drawing paper, which is 300 GSM, so it's nice and thick, and it is so dark. Now, in case it isn't obvious, this is not going to work for printing out or colouring pages, but for drawing, I haven't had the chance to use this yet because it's only just arrived in the mail, and I am really looking forward to seeing what I can do with my pencils on the dark surface. Now, this is Canson Mi-Teintes? Mi-Teintes. I'm actually not sure how to say it correctly, but this is pastel paper. And again, this has only just arrived in the mail, so I have not had a chance to use it. But I have seen so many coloured pencil artists recommend this along with the Bristol Papers as one of the best options to get really nice results. So the pastel paper has a rough side and a smooth side. So when it comes to coloured pencils, the smooth side is what most people recommend. So I'm using the smooth side of this paper, and I can already see it just feels so nice on your pencils. It's definitely in the expensive range, probably not a good choice for colouring pages, but if you are wanting to get into some higher level art, this for me feels very similar to the Strathmore Bristol series in the 400 or the 500 range. So it is that higher quality paper, and using the smooth side is really nice on both the Prismacolor and the Polychromos pencils. Just for the sake of comparison, I'll show you the coloured pencils on the back of this paper because the back is that rougher texture, better for pastels. There is a lot more tooth, so there's a lot more white grain coming through, and it will eat up a lot more of your pigment. So if you are going to use this at any point, definitely use the smooth side if pencils are your main medium. And then we have mixed media paper. This is designed to take everything. Watercolor, markers, pencils, acrylics. It's designed to take all of those wet mediums, but to have that vellum-like drawing surface to work really well with the pencils as well. When you buy a quality mixed media surface like this, you'll find it's actually not as thick as you might think, especially given that it takes so many wet mediums. Personally, I think if you're just using colored pencils, this is probably a little bit of overkill because you will get a little bit more texture compared to the Bristol vellums. If you're wanting to work with pencils and solvents, this might be the very paper that can help handle that extra moisture from those solvents. In fact, you can see exactly how well it works in my blending videos that I did recently, where I tested every possible blending method against 3 different papers, including this very mixed media paper. And since we've spent most of this video talking about pencils, I wanted to include a few quick recommendations specific to markers, especially alcohol markers, because they tend to bleed through the page or feather on certain papers. If you're using both pencils and markers together, choose a paper best suited to the main medium you plan to use, and try some different papers to see what gives you the best results. But if markers are your main medium, I recommend choosing a paper that is specifically designed for markers. Most marker paper is called bleed proof or similar, and you'll notice it's often quite thin. But my favorite paper for my Copic markers or the Ohuhu markers is the Expressit blending card. It works in most printers and handles the markers beautifully. They rarely bleed through and the ink absorbs slowly enough to allow you to blend your colors, which is an important feature of a marker paper that you'll miss out on with most normal papers. So the Expressit blending card is definitely my choice for printing. But for drawing, we also have the Canson bleed proof paper, which is a bit thinner, so not as good for printing, but great for drawing. And I've also been using the Ohuhu marker pad that they gave me in an earlier video. So I decided to test out our Copic and Ohuhu markers, both being alcohol based, on all of the drawing and Bristol papers that we tested earlier, mainly because I know that a lot of artists like to mix markers as a base layer and pencils on top. In most of these tests, the markers did pretty well. The biggest issue that they have on these papers compared to the specialty marker papers is that it just absorbs so much more marker. This does mean you have to work a little bit faster to get a good blend, but more than anything, it uses up a lot of ink. What interests me the most was the biggest difference between our 2 cheaper papers here, the Neenah cardstock and the Spring Hill Digital. The Spring Hill Digital really failed this test because the edges are so feathered. Now I know for me, this is one of the biggest frustrations I've had when using alcohol markers in coloring books. This feathering really ruins the look of a page, whereas the Neenah cardstock has such crisp edges that I am really impressed. In fact, I think it's actually performed better than some of the more expensive papers in this test. In fact, I would actually go as far as to say that the Neenah has better color than the Bristol Smooth and the Strathmore Bristol Vellum. I think the only thing that comes close to the color of the Neenah is actually the Canson drawing paper, which I didn't like as much the pencils. So the Neenah cardstock is a really good option at this point. Of course, when it comes to getting the most out of these alcohol markers, they performed so much better on the marker paper. Oh no, Shane, I just found another paper. We have to do this one. This is one of the best papers around. It is very expensive, but it's also another one that is 100% cotton. And if I don't review this paper, everyone is going to be asking about it in the comments. So let's quickly do this. So again, this is the first time I'm using this paper. I've only just bought it and apparently I put it at the bottom shelf and forgot it was there. This is very nice to use. The pencils are laying down so nicely, and I definitely wouldn't use this for my coloring pages, but I will give this a go for my more advanced drawings for sure. This paper is not intended for markers, so if you're wanting to do an underpainting, it would be better with something like your pan pastels, which I've bought to learn for myself, so we can try them in a future video. I'll pop the final results of these along with all those other papers on my blog for you to compare. With any paper you choose, there is an important tip that you need to remember if you want your artwork to last, and that's to always buy paper that's acid-free. Have you ever come across an old piece of paper that started to look a bit yellow or brown? This happens over time because of the acid in the paper fibers. Quality papers can be manufactured to be acid-free, and cotton and linen papers are naturally acid-free, which means they will last over time and won't discolor like cheaper paper. This was a long video today, so I want to thank you for watching this far and for being patient with me over the past few weeks as I gather all of this information together for you in this video and on my blog. I'm currently working on a similar video about pencil sharpeners with over 20 different sharpeners to compare in a few weeks. So if you found this video helpful, please press like below, then subscribe and push the little bell icon to join my notification club so that YouTube will tell you when that next video is ready too. This video is so long, I forgot to prepare a funny ending. I've been doing funny endings on all my videos lately. They've just watched this entire video waiting for something to happen, and now what? Disappointment. Oh, I think we set the bar too high last week. How long do I just sit here? Should I say a joke? Should we just end this?
Side note, you got a bit of paper in here.